pretty soon. Andy, can you see it?
Just
live on Facebook.
Now, mate. I think we are.
We're live.
Yeah. Welcome, everybody. Hopefully, people are dialing in. Welcome to another Friday chat debrief with Andy and myself. We've got a special guest on to this afternoon, tonight. This afternoon, it's not quite the night yet. But for those who are dialing in, a quick intro from the top. Property investor, 20 odd years coaching property investors across Australia and New Zealand for the last 17 as the professional advisor. And Andy in the banking space, 20 odd years and a little bit more, a bit older than me, I think, by one or 2 years, aren't you, mate? It's
just the last couple of months that have done that, mate.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. But we're joined tonight by a very special guest, Dermot, all dialing in from all the way over in Western Australia. The sun's out. It just came out for us. We just enjoyed that. And thanks for joining us tonight, mate. So what we might do is just get you to sort of give a bit of an overview. Your world, you're in the legal space and a bit of a specialised legal space for tonight's conversation, but maybe give us the big introduction or the short introduction, whatever it might be, for your sort of CV for tonight. We've got property investors and business owners dialing in, Andy.
Just before you do, mate, I'll just give the background because as it always seems to be, when Jason and I start to think about, what should we share in the wine and wisdoms, all of a sudden something pops into one of our lives that we find or we believe is going to make a huge amount of sense, huge amount of relevance, and have conversations with people who can kind of cut through some very complex issues that we're facing right across the board. Like the world has never been more complex for business owners. And it just so happens, as soon as Jason and I had that chat today, Dermot and I, we had a conversation. Dermot's your youngest partner of Deloitte's, is that?
Yeah, well, I was the youngest partner at Deloitte in Australia in the division that I worked in. That's quite a while ago now, but and then I left Deloitte and set up my own accounting practice.
Yeah, we won't hold it against you, mate. I'm an ex-investment banker and people still don't hate my guts completely. But we had a conversation and you articulated something which, I'll get you to share tonight, but something that Jason and I have been talking about for quite some time. And for business owners that, have baggage or have debts or have what I call the monkey on their back, something that's holding them back, this point in time, Jason and I have been saying, holds this unique position for businesses to be able to clean themselves up, get the monkey off their back, be able to start with a clean slate to a degree, but it's a very specialized area. And then you and I had a conversation and you managed to simplify everything down into terms that were really, really easy to understand in what is ultimately an area that most business owners don't know really exists. Yes. And they have a misconception that it exists and it is partially legal or not quite legal. And it's all about basically sanitizing a business and, releasing it from the things that are going to stop it from growing so that the business can kind of, live and fight and see another day. So we had that conversation earlier this week, and mate, I'm super glad that you had the time to be able to come on and bring some of the 27-degree warmth from over there. Both of you, look at me. I'm the anemic little bugger who's sitting in here looking like he's never seen sun in his life.
That's what you get for living in Victoria.
Yeah. And thanks for that, Andy and Jason. I'm delighted to join you guys this afternoon. As I briefly mentioned, so I was a partner at Deloitte in Australia, and I'm a partner in what is otherwise known as the insolvency division. It has a variety of names, but ultimately I'm a restructuring accountant. And we specialize in helping companies fix their balance sheets. So as you mentioned, companies that might have a raft of baggage that they're dealing with, albeit excessive ATO debt or excessive trade creditor debt. And we help them restructure the balance sheet to emerge, maybe not debt-free, but with a significantly reduced debt load so that they can try and make the business successful. And the reason that has become so critically important now is normally when you put a company into voluntary administration in order to achieve a restructure, all sorts of bad things happen to the company in that period. because you appoint a voluntary administrator, someone like me or my former partners, and they run the business during the period of restructure, and nothing good happens during an administration. An administrator doesn't take risk the same way that a business owner does. He doesn't run the business the same way that a business owner would. And as a result, all businesses suffer. Now, what's special about this opportunity is that businesses are effectively closed. So this is kind of like a free kick when it comes to what is otherwise one of the most disruptive events in the life of a business. And if you look to the big example that we have today is Virgin Australia. So Virgin went into voluntary administration 6 to 8 weeks ago. It's my, or less than that, it's my old partners at Deloitte who are the appointees on that. And they'll do a very good job. It couldn't be in better hands. But effectively, it's a free kick for Virgin, because what would normally happen is administrators would be presented with enormously difficult decisions around maintaining the operations of the business. And what most people don't appreciate is they have personal liability during that period. And this is just the biggest free kick in the world. The planes are all on the ground. There is no option to get them in the air, really. And we now have the world clambering over itself to try and recover. So it's the perfect period to effectively do the clean out, where you miss what would otherwise be all of the negativity that would come with a voluntary administration. And, you know, the reason we've been presenting that message for a few weeks now, interestingly enough, in the last week, there's been an enormous uptick in the number of inquiries from potential clients who need to restructure. And it's being presented because they've now faced the reality that it's time to think about opening up again. And that's when you see the reality that it's not that easy. And how do we open up? How do we actually do this when we've got this excessive debt on our back? And, you know, Virgin Australia made the right decision. It made the same decision that it needed to carve out a big portion of its debt in order to be successful in the future. And so that's effectively the opportunity. It's an extremely complex area of the law. Most people do not understand it, and they make mistakes in thinking that either they can't afford it, or it would take too long, or their business can't go through that kind of a restructure, and that's all wrong. And effectively what we explain to people is it's entirely achievable. It doesn't necessarily need new money to be invested into the business. You can look to a whole raft of sources of financing. For example, you can maintain the employee entitlements that are owed to employees, and that represents good consideration in a restructuring plan. So people don't necessarily understand that, and understand that there's a whole raft of ways you can fund restructuring without new money. And that's the message effectively that we're presenting. And we saw the major moves that we're seeing at the moment are retail. Retail is starting to open up, and it is in a very bad place. It's in a very dark place. You know, we saw the failure of Raw today. Now that's a global brand, and that has major implications for landlords across the country. Westfield will be particularly hurt by that, I suspect. But that's now going to be the story that we're going to see playing out. Now's the opportunity to fix the problem.
So, mate, just so we can contextualize it to a lot of people on the call, because we've, and also for me as well, so I can sort of spread the word. Let's go through some sort of practical businesses or businesses in the non-Virgin world, because we've talked about Virgin operations. But like, is it for your mums and dads who own pubs and restaurants? Is it for, you know, car dealerships? What do you see as the typical small to medium businesses that would potentially be right in that sweet spot of being able to do this?
Well, it's relevant. The first thing is it's relevant for all businesses. The rules that we have to play by when we're in this environment, the rules are the same for all businesses, no matter of your size. There is not one rule book for Virgin Australia and another one for small business. So the rules are the same. The art of it is to try and design a restructuring plan that is not too complex, so that the cost of it doesn't overbear on the company itself. Now, if your company is, in effect, if your company is turning over less than $200,000 or $300,000 a year, then the cost of a restructuring like this is going to be excessive for the company. But for any business with revenue of more than $500,000, it is entirely feasible to design and execute a restructuring plan where the cost of it is not excessive compared to the company's assets and leaves the company in a significantly better position than it is today. So I met with 2 clients this morning. I won't identify anyone, but they're roughly running with creditor balances of circa $1 million. And they're now losing something in the region of $20,000 to $30,000 a month in their profit and loss account. And we were quickly able to design at a very high level restructuring plans that would effectively carve out $1 million of debt from their balance sheet and put them back on a solid footing with restructured leases, with no debt, and profitable. And that's a significant change for a business of that size. And both of those businesses came into my office with the idea that wasn't available to them, that they were too small and that they couldn't do that. And that's wrong. That's not right at all. So really, you can be too small. I'm not going to sit here and say that if your business is turning over $50,000 a year, this is a good plan. That's not right. But for anybody turning over more than $250,000 a year, it is entirely feasible. And where that becomes relevant is in hospitality. An awful lot of hospitality venues, cafes and restaurants, turning over $200,000-300,000 a year, and they're going to be hurting in a very special way over the course of the next 12 months.
So, as an example, if I was let me throw a couple of scenarios at you.
Sure.
I've got a hotel down Mornington. Let's call it the Royal. It's not really the Royal for anybody, just in case you're watching, mate.
Sure.
It's not your business. Your business is great and it'll be going forever. But let's just say it was the Royal.
Yep.
And average turnover to $2 million a year or $3 million a year, through so just a bit of a downturn in certain areas over a period of time. I've acquired ATO debt of about 250K thereabouts, and I've got some related mortgages which are asset based, my personal asset base, with maybe $1 million, which I'm assuming they can't do much about, and some other old debtor stuff that's just not healthy, by way of potential suppliers where relationships have gone sour.
Yeah.
So let's just say another 150K worth of there. So ostensibly I've got maybe $1 million secured, $500,000 ATO, no, 200,000 ATO, and about another 180 worth of debtors. Am I in a position that is sort of able to take advantage of these types of maneuvers and sanitization processes?
Well, yes. So the maneuver or the tool that we're talking about is called a deed of company arrangement. And the way you execute a deed of company arrangement is you first of all place your company into voluntary administration, and then an administrator executes an agreement between the company and its creditors. He goes to creditors and gets approval for that with a simple majority at a meeting. But once he's got that approval, he then executes the agreement on behalf of the company. And what that agreement does at its core level is it compromises unsecured debt. So you take your ATO debt and the trade supplier disputes that you mentioned in that example. That's exactly what a deed of company arrangement would do. And what it does is it effectively presents to those creditors a situation where it says there are 2 alternatives here. You can place this company into liquidation, and in most cases, in the small to medium-sized businesses, you get 0, because in immediate liquidation, you manifest a catastrophic loss for creditors. Or we can accept this alternative. And this alternative can be as creative as you can come up with. That might be 1 cent on the dollar, 2 cents on the dollar, or even 0 as it comes to unsecured creditors like that. Because when we liquidate,
equity in the business.
It can include equity in the business. Typically, we tell our clients to stay away from giving equity in the business because it becomes very messy down the track. And one client this morning was particularly interested in giving equity to a creditor. And my advice to him was, I think you should consider what I call quasi-equity, a royalty based on future revenue. You might say, well, over the next 12 months, once our revenue surpasses $100,000 a month, then we will give you a 10% royalty on revenue above that. and that will last for 12 months, and then it will cut off. That is very different from giving away ordinary shares in your business.
Yeah.
Which I tell everyone to stay away from, because it opens all sorts of Pandora's box. So yes, you can do that. Again, we try and stay away from it. But predominantly, the reason creditors will be interested in accepting a deed of company arrangement is, first of all, it will give them a better return than they'll get if the company's liquidated. And secondly, it will allow the business to survive, and they'll keep on making money as they trade with the business. Now, you have to be realistic that if your creditors have lost some money with you trading, they may be reluctant to take risk on you in the future. But that's imminently solvable by using deposits or bank guarantees, or even just trying to stay ahead of the exposure. So that's why creditors are always keen to explore the options in a deed of company arrangement.
So, can I ask a quick question there, Andy?
Sure.
Dermot, so is it accurate to say, if you as the business owner are proactive and appoint someone prior, rather than a creditor appointing someone or taking it through the courts and then having the court appoint, there's two different outcomes, two different control mechanisms in that space? Like, you're better off being proactive and doing it yourself rather than losing control and having someone else appoint. Is that something that's important to know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If you sit back and allow one of your creditors to apply to court for a liquidator to be appointed, and that liquidator is ultimately appointed, that is an absolute disaster. Because the liquidator comes in, you've never met the guy or the girl. He comes in with an investigative hat on, and he wants to find out why the business failed and whether or not there's any recoveries that can be made by suing the directors. And just contemplate, that's his perspective as he comes in. If you can approach the situation yourself, you can sit down with a practitioner, you can negotiate how the restructuring will look, you can prepare the cash flows in advance, you can understand, and some people refer to it as a pre-pack DACA, that it's all of the hard work is done prior to the appointment. That's not necessary, but it can be done. It is an entirely different world to allowing it to go into liquidation at the hands of the court. And even practitioners, to be honest, don't like taking appointments through the court, because what you end up with is a dog's breakfast. You end up with companies that have been emptied of assets. There's enormous things that have gone wrong, and your job is now to go and tell tales to ASIC on the offences that have been committed. So that is to be avoided at all costs.
So this doesn't just apply to equity or debts, does it? This applies to contracts as well, because people might have some contingent. It applies.
Well, let's talk about the most common contract is leases. So when an administrator is appointed, yes, he has the ability to terminate leases. Of course, that gives rise to a claim against the company for the breach of the contract. But in effect, that breach can then be dealt with through the deed of company arrangement as well. So it's a very powerful mechanism. What it can't do is it can't force your landlord to allow you to stay in the premises. So if you've incurred a whole raft of debt with your landlord, and then you've compromised it in a DACA, or the deed of company arrangement, your landlord can always say, well, I'm calling it to a halt and you need to leave. You can't stop him from doing that. But there are ways of negotiating with landlords to try and get them to work with you during this phase. But yes, it allows you to get out of otherwise onerous contracts, as we call them. And then to the extent that there are effectively damages claims that arise from terminating the contract, they just become unsecured claims against the company and go away through the DACA. They're dealt with through the DACA.
And what about how do you come out as a director of a company through these things generally? Like as far as your financial standing as a individual body, can you go to the bank and refinance your principal place of residence, or is this a big black mark on your name?
Well, so the first thing to remember is that it's not you personally that is going through an administration. It is the company. It's a separate legal entity. It's an artificial person for the purposes of running the business. And it's that company that's going through the restructure. Now, it's not right to say that there's no effect on the director. There's two effects on the director. As long as the company is in what we refer to as external administration, and that includes liquidation and receivership and administration. As long as it's in external administration, if anyone does a credit search on you, your credit search will show that you are the director of a company in external administration. But that disappears as soon as the external administration is finished. And a DACA can be completed and done and dusted inside of 12 weeks. So it's only for that 12-week window that something will pop up. And that can be explained away in most cases with a letter from the administrator. But yes, there is an impact there. But there is one other thing to consider, and that is what we call the two-strike rule. There is an ASIC policy that says if you've been a director of more than 2 companies that have failed in the last 7 years, those 2 strikes allow ASIC to potentially disqualify you from managing corporations for a period of, I think it's 3 to 5 years. Now, so the 2-strike rule is important to understand, but a strike is technically when a company goes into liquidation and creditors receive less than 50 cents on the dollar. If you restructure your business using a deed of company arrangement, that's not a strike. Doesn't represent a strike, and in theory, you could do as many of them as you want. Yeah, I'll express a bit of caution. If you were on your 4th DACA inside of 5 years, there would be a lot of red flags raised at the ATO and ASIC. But there is the 2-strike rule to understand. But what we find is as long as people haven't done the wrong thing, as long as there's no horrific insolvent trading claims or fraud claims, typically ASIC take a fairly commercial view on these things. I've been liquidator of quite a few companies where the 2-strike rule has kicked in, and ASIC have always come back and asked my view on, ought we disqualify the director? They want to understand more about the offences that may have been committed. So there are potential consequences for directors. Probably the biggest consequence, though, is the commercial one. Directors come in and talk to me, and the first thing I say is, have you provided any personal guarantees for debts of the company? And very frequently the answer from directors is, no, we haven't given any personal guarantees. And then a week later, of course, the list comes out and they've guaranteed about 15 of them. It's important to understand where the distinction is between you and the company. And if you have guaranteed stuff, well, what is it? And how can you try and start to wind that in? There's ways of winding it in, but it takes time. I find that in my business, I refuse to give personal guarantees at all. And
but where they come up, Dermot, in your experience, just because I can guarantee you, because I've had this conversation before, I can guarantee you that there'll be 100, maybe 200, 300 different business owners that will watch this. They will go, no, haven't signed a personal guarantee. And I reckon that maybe 10 out of the 300 are right. So what are the typical ones so that we could kind of just articulate the main culprits that most people
certainly the first thing is leases. Leases, usually the template includes a personal guarantee. And if you go back to your lease, you'll quickly be able to see if there's a guarantee embedded in there. What I find with leases is if you push back and say, no, I don't provide personal guarantees, the response from a landlord is usually, well, that's fine. We just need an extra month bank guarantee from you, and it'll be fine. And that has been our experience since we got established.
Yeah.
The other one then is if you've got credit agreements with major suppliers, like if anyone buying from Bunnings, for example, if you've ever seen a Bunnings credit agreement, it includes a personal guarantee. And Bunnings are hard to deal with because, you're dealing with
a ruthless
administrative person. They will not negotiate away from the personal guarantee. But that's the exception. The vast majority of suppliers will agree to just waive the personal guarantee if you just don't sign it, just stroke it out. But to the extent that you have signed those guarantees, it's in the credit agreements. You've got to go back to the credit agreements that you signed, whether it's 5 years ago or 10 years ago, and you've got to look at the detail. And they're very powerful clauses. There are one line that say, first of all, I guarantee the company's debt. And then to make it even worse, they say, I provide security over all of my assets to support the guarantee.
Yeah.
And that's a disaster because you just
Dermot, would you say so that you're saying that's number one, and from a lender and a property guy, that's 100%. I've seen it as well.
Yeah.
What would be number 2 and 3 in this kind of a list if you were to list? Here's the 3 fucking biggest sins that that a business owner does.
The next biggest sin is not lodging. It's twofold. It's not lodging either your business activity statements or your to the extent that your superannuation is late in paying it, then you've got an obligation to lodge SGC returns. Now, most people don't, and that's critical, because what happens when you're late in paying your BAS or your super, the day after it's meant to be paid, a penalty arises against the directors personally, and it's called a non-lockdown penalty. And that's critical, because what it means is the penalty can be discharged either by paying the tax that gave rise to it, or putting the company into voluntary administration or liquidation. If the lodgement remains outstanding for more than 3 months in the case of BAS, or 1 month for superannuation, it turns into a lockdown penalty. And what that means is that you can no longer discharge the penalty by putting the company into liquidation. And so the number of times directors come to us, and it turns out they've got a whole big piece of tax debt, and had they only lodged their BAS, they wouldn't be liable for it personally, but they didn't. And now they're on the hook personally, and it's a lockdown penalty, and they can't get away from it. You can negotiate it, because it's a penalty and it's not the tax itself. You can negotiate with the ATO, and they will negotiate quite heavily in some cases, whereas they will not negotiate on underlying tax. But the number of cases that come in, and the penalties have already manifested, the lodgements haven't been done, and there's very little we can do about that at that stage. The liabilities have come home to roost.
Yeah.
And for everybody on the call, the context around that is that when people start to get into a little bit of cash flow trouble in their business, they think we'll delay lodging the BAS, because as soon as we lodge the BAS, then we're going to end up with another bill. And to just simplify it, it's basically saying, well, lodge it and just don't pay it.
Correct.
So make sure that you've got a debt accumulating with the ATO. That's fine, but you get into trouble when you don't lodge the BAS and you go, and also the super, don't pay the super. We had a question in here about advertising media guarantees by business owners. So, sorry, what about advertising media guarantees by business owners?
Do you mean guaranteeing the company's liability for its ad spend?
I'm assuming so.
Right, and I experienced this 2 days ago. We have a separate e-commerce business selling luxury men's accessories, and we were looking into a very big media spend in partnership with a big magazine in Australia, and we looked at their credit application. Not that we really wanted credit, and the credit application did a whole raft of horrific things. If we had signed it, not only did it include a guarantee from me personally, I also then gave security on my assets personally for the whole thing. It indemnified them to go and spend whatever money they needed to spend, either to get legal advice on the registration of their securities, to get legal advice on the adequacy of their securities, and then to cover all of their expenses for the enforcement of their securities, with no limit on the expenses whatsoever. Now, that kind of a credit agreement is just literally horrific.
Yeah.
Whatever lawyer drafted that for them thought he was too smart, and he's gone too far, because anybody who reads that will say, "I'm not signing that. That is horrific," and we didn't sign it, of course. So personal guarantees operate the same, just no matter whether it's an ad spend or if it's a lease or if it's Bunnings. They operate the same. They're very powerful. One mistake people make is they assume that I gave the guarantee in my capacity as the director of the company, and when I cease to become a director of the company, when I resign, the guarantee goes away.
I was going to ask that one.
No, it doesn't. The guarantee continues. And there is a way to try and get yourself off the guarantee, and there's a bit of ambiguity around it, but we advise clients to write to the creditor or to the supplier and say, look, I'm off. I'm not guaranteeing anything any further. I'm not liable for any future debt that's incurred. You can't get away from debt that has been incurred up to that date. But if you make it clear that you're not guaranteeing anything going forward, then you leave it for the supplier to renegotiate with the company. And if it wants to keep on giving credit, well, that's up to it. but it requires you to take a very proactive step to try and limit the guarantee.
Beautiful. What would be the third one? So we've got personal guarantees. What was it?
So the ATO lodgements.
ATO lodgements.
Oh, what's the third one? I mean, look, I'll give you an example. I had a guy came to me and he said, look, we're in a bit of trouble. People are screaming for money. And I don't want to put money into the company's bank account because I'm worried that the ATO will garnish it out of the bank account. So
that wasn't the treasurer, was it?
Sorry?
That wasn't the treasurer actually speaking freely,
No.
was it?
He said, what I've done is I've set up an account out here in my own name, and I've started diverting all of the company's revenue into this new account that I've set up in my own name. Do you think that's a problem? Mate, what have you done? I mean, that's just wrong. And the other, and he knew, he didn't need me to explain it to him. He knew in his heart that what he'd done was horrifically wrong and that he needed to fix it. And I'm pleased to say he did. But, don't do anything stupid. I mean, to the extent that you're taking risk on trying to trade through a period of difficulty and it presents risk to you that it might be insolvent and things like that, yes. Don't do silly things like that. That is just, it's effectively theft. And if you do that and it all has to be unpacked by a liquidator, it's going to be an absolute disaster. That's when we start to talk about prison time. And we don't talk about prison time for things having gone wrong civilly, even though you ought to have known better. But when you start effectively stealing money like that, that's a disaster. And most people know inherently when they're there. They don't need to be. They don't need to be reminded of it.
But so just in that scenario, I'd be curious to know, what made him come to you? Because I would assume when I've seen people in that scenario, it's almost like for whatever reason I've met some of these people and I've literally caught them at the time when they were about to stab themselves.
Yeah.
And life put us together, and it's kind of like, hang on, we need to have a conversation. Let's calibrate. What happened to him? Because he ended up with you.
He had been talking to me for a while about options available to the company. The company was going through a difficult period. My view was that he ought to have put it into liquidation by that stage. And he was still trying to, achieve something. I think he was trying to make himself feel better, quite honestly, but he was trying to achieve something by trading on, and it was just getting worse and worse. And so there was quite a few phone calls where he would come back and say, well, what if I do this or what if I do that? And I was trying to guide him through the maze of, well, yes, there's a risk with doing that, but that could cause you a liability down the track. And then he presented me with this, which is pretty much, what if I kill somebody? And you're like, mate, you can't do that.
So I've got the ebook for you, mate. It's the 5 secrets to managing through a business crisis.
Yeah.
And I think the 5 points that you've gone through today is firstly, stay calm and don't try to hang on too long, because hanging on too long will ultimately see you in the too bad, too sad. Make sure that your BAS and super are always up to date, and make sure that as a director of a business, you don't sign any personal guarantees. And that's probably a hard thing for many people who will be listening to this, because there'll probably be people who will be sifting through their car leases and their other lease documents. But it's a really important lesson to learn. But I almost think the most important one there is to stay calm and not try and hold on too long, because quite often it's the ego that sees, I can just keep going. But what I'm getting from this conversation and what I've seen in other areas are people doing this very, very well. And I'll stress also really ethically, right? And I'm not the world's biggest fan of the ATO. But I'm very fond of small businesses, right? So I don't like to do something that sees somebody else in another small business getting hurt.
Yes.
But what I've seen in this space is that when people get it early and go, okay, and this is a management accounting thing, it's like, I know my numbers, I'm done. Unless a miracle happens, I'm cactus. Instead of burying the head in the sand, freaking out and just trying to hold on with your ego, you go, I need to speak with somebody who absolutely knows their stuff, so that I can keep up to date. And there is a way that we can get through this, assuming I've got a good business model, and maybe the ATO doesn't get paid, and maybe my debtors get a couple of 25 cents or 50 cents to the dollar. But if I'm a dickhead, I hold on and I bury my head in the sand, everyone gets nothing, including me.
And the other thing is, at the end of the day, when it comes to restructure a company, you ultimately have to sit in front of your creditors and convince them to support, albeit just by a simple majority, you convince them to support whatever plan it is that you've got. That bottom line. And my experience, I'm doing this for 15 years, my experience is that creditors will have massive regard to how you dealt with them during the process. And if you've been upfront with them, you haven't buried your head in the sand, if you haven't lied to them, and if you're seen to be just trying to do the right thing, even though there's a catastrophic loss on the debt, they will ultimately recognize that and they will support you. They may not do business with you again in the future, but they won't ram the company into liquidation just to prove a point. But if you've dealt with them badly, if in their view, you've stolen money from them, you've misled them, or if there's some questionable fraud in the company's accounts, that's when they turn nasty. And that's when they'll do things like vote to put a company into liquidation, even though it doesn't appear to be the best thing to do. And even worse than that, that's when they'll come and spend good money to put you into bankruptcy. Remember, you may have provided a personal guarantee, but quite frankly, you would need to spend about $10,000 or $15,000 to get somebody into bankruptcy. The process is you first of all have to get judgment against them, then you issue a bankruptcy notice, and then you take that bankruptcy notice back to court and you ask a court to put them into bankruptcy. Well, try doing that for less than $10,000 or $15,000. That requires sustained commitment and capital from somebody who's really pissed off to get you into bankruptcy. In most cases, there's no return to come from the bankruptcy. It's just proving a point. Yeah. So if you've been a good person and you haven't lied to them and you haven't stolen from them and you haven't refused to talk to them, most creditors are not willing to go through that pain and suffering and spend that kind of money just to hurt you. That's certainly our experience.
Yeah. So I'm interested to know, mate, because I'm sure you'll have a take on it. The law starts to evolve over time. Is this a loophole in the law, or is this something that was made by design for the design of which it is, in order to be able to help businesses that have made mistakes or have not been slightly mismanaged or have gone through periods of hardship? How did it all come about?
No, this is not a loophole in the law. This was specifically brought in the late 90s to effectively replicate the system that the Americans have. So you hear on the movies all the time or on the news that a company has applied for Chapter 11 protection in the US. Yeah. The way the US guys operate is they allow the company to come up with a restructuring plan and say, this is what we'd like to do, similar to the DACA concept that we have. And then they go to court and they say, court, can you please approve this restructuring plan and appoint a trustee to oversee it? And we'll go and we'll implement this. And that's a good system, and always was a good system. And it allows good companies to avoid liquidation. We didn't have a system like that. We had two options available effectively. We had liquidation, which just kills the company and liquidates it. And we had what's called a scheme of arrangement. But the problem with a scheme of arrangement is it's very complex. It's very expensive. Roughly, if somebody asked me what would a scheme of arrangement cost, to do one for less than $500,000 is very hard. Depends on the complexity of the company, but it's an expensive process. Sometimes it's necessary, but it doesn't work for a small business. And the law was changed in the late 90s to bring in what we call Part 5.3A of the Corporations Act. And it's specific legislation that is designed to give a company an option to restructure to allow it to survive. But again, there's one major test. And that test is that no creditor can get less than they would get if it was liquidated. So it can't prejudice anybody. It can't say to one creditor, you would get 20 cents on the dollar if we wind up, but we're going to give you 10. Not allowed to do that. But that is ultimately the bottom line test. And when you think it through, it's a very, very good piece of legislation. It allows companies to survive and people to keep their jobs in situations where the only alternative is just to wind it all up.
Yeah.
Because I think this got a bad name, didn't it? Over periods of time, I think that I'm not exactly sure where, I'm not going to say you guys, but I'm going to say the Price Waterhouse and the KPMGs and of the world in the administration and liquidation circle. They've got a pretty notorious bad name of, well, to public opinion.
Yeah, that's not their fault. The reality was, if we go back 15 years, the legislation was different, and it was quite hard to put a company straight into liquidation. So we had all of these companies that were destined for liquidation. There were basket cases, but it was too hard to put them into liquidation. It took about a week and a half to get them in. And so what people did, it was very easy to put a company into voluntary administration. All of those basket cases went into administration. And so the profile of administration was, well, it's a disaster. It's just basket case companies that are gone bust. And so it was kind of abusing the legislation. What we did to fix that is the legislation was changed on liquidations. Now it's very easy to put a company into liquidation. And if that's what needs to happen, that's just what we do. Administrations are reserved for companies where there is some possibility of doing something. So it has started to get a better name. But what has also given the industry a bad rap is a lot of people have heard of phoenixing and the ATO, and people have been talking about cracking down on phoenixing. Now, what phoenixing is it's a nickname for a situation where somebody takes the assets out of a company for no consideration and then liquidates the company. That's what a phoenix is. You start again over here with the assets, but you haven't paid for them. And that's why it's illegal, because you've effectively stolen the assets.
Yes.
Now, that was being done systematically, predominantly on the East Coast, I think, and where there were some.
Yeah, it's true, and predominantly in the property development space.
There you go. So, no, actually, it doesn't affect property much because of the need to transfer title. So what would happen? And anybody who's watched, The Sopranos, this is an old fraud. This has been going on forever. But what they do is they go and they set up a company. They go and get a couple of homeless guys, and they put the homeless guys on as directors. And then they incur some debt and they buy some assets. And then they move the assets into company number 2 and liquidate the company with the homeless guys as directors. And so a liquidator comes in, he's got no money. He's got 2 directors who are lying on the street sleeping. And, there's very little that he can do. So that's the systematic phoenixing that the ATO has been trying to crack down on. It's actually advisory firms that are doing it over and over and over again. But it's a very old fraud. It has been happening for decades. That's the phoenixing they're trying to crack down on. As liquidators, we always make the point, there's no need to get new legislation. We've got legislation to deal with this. But every time we report this to ASIC that somebody has done a phoenix, we're begging them to do something, and ASIC's hands are tied. They don't have the funding, they don't have the manpower. But there's so many phoenixes run under the radar just because ASIC doesn't come and fund us to do anything.
In today's day and age, the difference between a phoenix and a normal, correct flow through of restructuring would probably be reasonably minimal as far as asset values are concerned, I would have thought, because what are the asset values of a company in the middle of a COVID-19 crisis?
Sure, but it's a very different situation where it's
an
insolvency practitioner who has tested the market for the value of an asset and then entered into an arm's length arrangement to sell those assets, even though they may have ended up back with the director or his new entity. That's a very different situation from the director doing it himself, and it's now the 4th time that he's moved the assets. That's the extreme that is illegal. But you're right. You're fundamentally right. A lot of the transactions that we do in insolvency, you could describe them as phoenixes. The difference becomes what was paid for the assets and was it market value.
Yes.
That's the critical difference. And yes, in the world of COVID, there's going to be a very low bar for the value of assets to apply to these situations.
So Dermot, in the world of the way this is described, sort of out there, sort of the idea of like safe harboring laws and this, that, and the other. Where does this all sort of converge? Safe harboring, administration, liquidation. Kind of, can you sort of unpack, those, different streams of description and sort of give a bit of clarity?
All right, so if we just back up for a second, if you've got a company that's facing financial difficulty and is potentially insolvent, directors acting reasonably and within the law should make an assessment of, is the company insolvent or not? If they conclude that the company is insolvent, then they have a problem. And that problem is that if they continue to incur debt, they could be personally liable for the debt that they're incurring. They have a positive obligation to stop the company from incurring debt. And if they don't do that and they incur debt, that can become a problem down the track. So you appoint a voluntary administrator. He investigates what has happened. He comes to a conclusion that, yes, a DACA may be possible to restructure the company. But you know what? The directors traded this thing whilst it was insolvent. So if it goes into liquidation, I could sue the directors. And I think I could recover enough money to make the liquidation the best outcome for creditors. So that's a problem for directors. That's why the risk manifests, and that's what leads them to appoint administrators in a lot of cases. Now, what was happening was, if you were an independent director on a public company, for example, and you formed the view that this company may be insolvent, why would you take any risk to try and resolve the issue? So in a lot of cases, independent directors, their first go-to response was, we got to put the company into administration because I'm not taking the risk.
Yeah.
And that's where a couple of years ago, we brought in the legislation called the safe harbor legislation. And what it effectively said was, okay, even though the company may be insolvent, if you've got a good plan that is in the best interests of creditors, i.e. it would increase the return to creditors, and you've got the right advice to help you with that, so you need advice from a practitioner like me, then we will give you protection from insolvent trading whilst you execute that plan. So it allowed independent directors to say, well, actually, there's something we can do to improve the situation. We're protected whilst we try and do it, even if it fails. We have this protection, and so we can go ahead and implement that. Now, it didn't turn out as good as that. The legislation had, unique issues or aspects which meant that it wasn't risk-free for directors. For example, if during the course of the restructure, when you were living under safe harbor protection, or you thought, if you failed to lodge one of your business activity statements, then not only did you lose safe harbor, but safe harbor never existed for you in the past. So that's difficult. If you're the director and you think you've had safe harbor for 4 months, only to find that the CFO missed a BAS, and now your safe harbor has disappeared altogether, that's difficult to live with. So it's not risk-free. It is a little bit problematic. What we've found in the last year, most of the times we've been approached to give safe harbor advice, is we've looked at the plan they had and we said, guys, this plan is not going to work. We cannot give you safe harbor advice that would allow you to execute this plan because it's a terrible, terrible plan. And we've helped them come up with something that was better, whether that included going into administration or not. Sometimes it did. But safe harbor is complex. It was a lot of push and pull on it. It was molded towards the end. And what we're left with today is not ideal, to be quite honest with you. I think to be honest with you, I think a better strategic view would have been to weaken the insolvent trading laws. We have some of the harshest insolvent trading laws in the world. If you go to any other developed country, what you'll find is they don't have the same rigidity on compensation for insolvent trading. The Australian laws are quite special in that regard.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Mate, fascinating conversation, mate. It's been fantastic. How are you going there, Andy? I see you writing a few notes. I've got a few more things up my sleeve here, but I can tell from here that your mind's fucking whirring.
Maybe not in the same direction, mate. I thought I might just change up the pace here and put Dermot on the spot for the quick 10-question challenge.
Oh, I don't know what it is, but I don't like it already.
So have we got a timer? We don't have a timer, but it's the quick fire 10-question challenge.
Okay.
So first thing that comes to mind. So will Virgin be a Queensland-owned company?
Yes.
Markets up or down in the next 3 months?
Sideways.
Fremantle or West Coast?
Oh, West Coast. Come on.
AFL or rugby?
Oh, rugby.
Rugby or soccer?
Oh, soccer.
Dogs or cats?
Oh, both.
Oh, sorry, you can't sit on the fence.
All right. Cats.
Somebody's going to be pissy at you when you get
Yeah.
home. Favorite activity?
Oh, boating.
Most memorable moment?
Oh. Most memorable moment, my daughter being born.
There's always somebody who's going to be pissed off. So your wife might be a little bit angry about the wedding.
That's a good 50-50, that one. I think that's included the wife as well. So, I think it's safe there.
Yeah.
Who would you prefer to see in the casket, Kim Jong-un or Trump?
Oh, I'd have to say Trump.
And what's the best men's luxury brand?
Aussies men.
Aussies men.
Yeah. It's the newest as well.
It's Denny Crane.
Denny Crane. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you for having me.
It's been fantastic, mate. Thank you. I know it was a bit early for you to drink, maybe over there in your neck of the woods, but maybe you've got a drinker. But Andy,
that comes next.
It's been fascinating to have you on today, and I really appreciate your time, mate. It's been super valuable. I know people listening in, I've been seeing a few comments. They've been loving what you've had to say, mate. So, best way to find you, best way to track you down.
Easiest way is you see my name there is track me down on LinkedIn. I'm pretty sure there's only one Dermot McVeigh in Australia, so you'll get me on LinkedIn very quickly.
Awesome,
mate. The Dermot just said, what? Or what we'll do, if you're okay with it, we'll just post your website in the bottom of this as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you're all good with that, but that was incredible. I think that I'd love to do more of these sorts of awareness pieces with you as well over time, because I think your industry has, I think all of our industries have these veils over them, and the veils come from. I don't think
any of us can chuck grenades over the fence, Sandy. Property, financial planners, accountants.
I was just realising that we're all sitting under here together, but I think a lot of it is based on misconception, because bad news travels fast, and then the complexity of your industry is something that not many people can simplify the way that you've done it today. And I love it. And most of my notes weren't the 10 questions. Most of them were legitimately just ways of being able to get it out there. And mate, I don't know if any other sort of pearls of wisdom before we finish off today.
Oh, look, you've said it yourself that, just don't try and do this kind of stuff yourself. And I feel that when we say that, most often people think we're just hunting for fee-paying roles, and that's just not true. I can talk for 95% of people in my industry. We're willing to sit down with people for hours without receiving a cent to guide them through what these issues are. They are, in some cases, they're life-changing transactions that you're looking at. Either positive or negative, and you simply should not try and do them yourself. And people will always sit down with you and help. It may lead to engagements and fee-paying engagements, but that's not what people are. It's not what me and my colleagues are hunting for to start with. Sit down with any practitioner; they'll always give you an hour of their time, and it's worth its weight in gold, because this can be a minefield if you get it wrong.
I can testament to that, because just in the last year, I've had two good friends of mine whose businesses have had to go down this track. And luckily enough, we had the conversation early enough, or really they just didn't know their numbers. And that was where I got involved. And I looked at them, I'm like, well, hang on, you don't need me, because it's not about wealth. It is about survival, and you're in a big hole, and we need to get you in the right hands. And they weren't your hands in that point in time. I wish they were, because you sort of got a much more simple way of dealing with it. But to give you the context, to give the people who are watching context, I think it was a business turning over $10 million a year, and effectively just got itself into a bit of a debt hole with a machinery business, and it just couldn't get out of it. No matter what they were doing, they just couldn't burn the tires fast enough. They just broke that barrier where the repayments, the debt on profit, it just was unworkable, and that they found an ethical way where they took all of their suppliers through. People had to wait to get paid, but they are being paid. Yep. So the only person who didn't get paid was the tax office, and I think that the landlord, they ended up going to, because the landlord was being a dick. Yeah. And wasn't trying to help, was just trying to stop, but didn't have the appropriate clauses. Anyway, that business, I think one of the most ethical I've ever seen. He didn't have to have the negotiations with the relationships, but he did. Belted through it, came out the other side, employed, another three or four people, and then went straight on to doing, $500,000 worth of profit a year.
Yeah.
And, it's stories like that, especially when they're people that it's it's incredible, because you understand what it is for a small business to even get.
It's great to hear stories like that, and I could sit here and tell you about stories like that all day. I suppose the last thing we tell people is when they come in and they say, I want to restructure my business, I start teasing out from the very first conversation. I'm trying to work out, do they have the appetite to make this work? Because when you start a new business, we all know what it's like. You need red hot intensity to get momentum and get going. When you're turning a business around, you need more than that, because you inherit all of the distraction that has come from the past. And okay, you may be dealing with the debt parcel that you're trying to get rid of, but the distraction has built up. And so now you need to deal with that distraction and still execute on effectively starting up a business. And so the way I articulate it is, you no longer need red hot intensity, you need white hot intensity. And so I look for that. When I've got people saying to me, we want to restructure our business, I'm looking into their eyes, and you can see it in their eyes. Do you have the appetite to make this work? And very often you can see that they just don't. And you know that you're going to get 1, 2, 4 weeks into the process, and it's going to become too hard, because you need to be able to apply the energy to make it work. And that, if you don't have that at the start, that limits your options horrifically.
Yeah, God, that's true. And from everything I've seen, absolutely. The ones that come through, just, geez, you have so much respect for them.
Go do Date with Destiny with Tony Robbins or something like that. But you need to have a conversation with yourself, and you need to decide, am I doing this or not? There are no halfway houses.
Just pay for it out of the first company.
I can certainly say, Dermot, GFC was my furnace of becoming a true entrepreneur or not. And, thankfully for me, I had an advisor very much like yourself who got me through that world. I certainly bit off way more than I could chew as a young, excited entrepreneur in the property space. And the GFC came along and taught me a few lessons of humility and business. But I can say to anyone listening, for someone like Dermot to be in your team, and having an advisor. And at the end of the day, Dermot, sometimes I think for you guys too, some of the stress and pressure, even you guys are professionals and you do it well, sometimes that responsibility is pretty heavy too. But I can say by and large, my experience was extremely positive. And for my advisor who helped me out of a tough situation, I couldn't have asked for better. And, for you guys doing that stuff, sometimes I think the media plays, to their strength to sell newspapers, but you guys are lifesavers, and I mean that in a true sense of the word for business owners.
No, thank you. We appreciate that, and I speak for all of my colleagues when I say that. That's certainly how we approach it. So it's delightful to hear that from someone else. Thank you.
Mate, it's not just us. You're getting a hell of a response from the people who are dropping comments on here, mate. So the feeling is more than mutual.
Awesome. Yeah. Mate, awesome to have you on, mate. Thank you.
All right, guys. Thank you very much.
Enjoy your couple of drinks at the end of the day today too. It's Friday for you too.
It is indeed. It is. All right. Have a nice weekend, guys.
Thanks, Dermot. Cheers, mate.
Bye.
All right. Thanks, Andy. Well, mate, that was awesome. Good chat. Friday, we did it. We dressed in black, but I did collarless and you did collar. So,
we both had the puffy suits.
We did.
Hang on. We forgot to send Dermot off in the right style.
I think you got to turn the music up a little bit. But anyway, all right. Well, here's to everyone. Have a good Friday, everybody. Hopefully that was useful. Give us some suggestions. Send us a message, whatever it might be. You know, people you want to hear from. I thought that was awesome, mate. Great to chat to someone of that caliber, and hopefully everyone enjoyed it, Andy. So, mate, that's it from me. You got any closing comments?
No. Look, the more that I do these with you, mate, the more people we find that like Dermot, like Paul. Initially it was just us deciphering what was going on in the world, and just guide us, I guess, is the thing. Is if there are areas that you're having challenges, just tell us what the challenges are. Even if you don't know what the question is, just let us know what the issues are, and we'll bring our resources together to find the people to help. And because sometimes we don't even know, we know guys like Dermot and we know guys like Paul, but sometimes it's just not on our radar to think about certain things. And
totally.
Sometimes it's serendipitous that, you have the conversations like I did with Dermot earlier this week, and you go, holy smoke, like that is so relevant now. And for those people who are still watching now, just as a bit of a recap, just in case you joined late, it's about restructuring businesses that have monkeys on their backs, whether it be debt, whether it be, big leases or things that are holding them back that will basically destroy the business if they can't get rid of them. It's a way of being able to sanitize this in a ethical and in an ethical, moral, and financial way that nobody gets screwed over. It's about the business expanding into the future. So, if we can solve more of these for you, we love it, and we learn in the process as well. So please let us know. Mate, that's about all I have.
It reminds me of the 6 degrees of separation, Andy. Like we know someone who knows someone, and that's why I always say to my clients, in property, there's nothing that we don't know, and if we don't know it, we know someone who knows it. Like, end of story. And I think that in our world, if our 20+ year experiences in our fields, in our lanes, in this space that we're chatting about, there's nothing we don't know, or if we don't know it, we can find someone who knows it and knows it for good, So give us a shout out, gang. Give us a comment. Tell us what you want to know. We love doing this stuff, number one, because we have a few glasses of wine and we're in lockdown, but number two, we love to help. And that's kind of at the core of, I think, who we are, Andy. So that's why we get on so well. I think, we love the idea of helping people and, making sure that we can add some value in one way, shape or form. So, mate, thank you for the Friday. It's good. Yeah,
absolutely. And please, guys, share this. Even if you're not a business owner, if you're a property investor, you're a PAYG earner, share it, maybe even on your page. Like, we're not trying to get anything out of this. This is just spreading information, but share it out there, because if you know a business owner who's in these circumstances, and what I can tell you is that when this is done, your best friends, your family, the kind of impacts that it has when it's done the right way is completely life-changing for everyone around them. I can't explain it any better than that. It really is. If there's anything that we've done so far that we should share around and hopefully get a story back from at some point in time, because we'd love to know that, yes, this changed, and then they went on, they fought on. I almost get a little bit teary-eyed thinking about it, because of the people that I've seen, and it, mate, you've been through, different client interactions and personal experiences, and it's tough. And the part that Dermot said about the white, the white energy, like if you're a red hot, you got to be white hot. It's so true. But if I think most people will find that whiteness, and it's a thing of beauty when you can actually do it right, and it really does. It saves lives. So before I get too emotional, Jace, take over and wind up.
Mate, I feel you, brother, all the way from Queensland to Victoria. Mate, been awesome. And mate, well, let's do it. One last one, wine and wisdom. I think we'll call that a wrap. Ching ching. Happy Friday, everybody. Where's the music, Andy? All right. Take care, everyone. Have a good weekend. Bye, guys.